On the morning of November 12, 2001, the weather in New York was clear and calm. At John F. Kennedy International Airport, the departure queue was running exactly on schedule. American Airlines Flight 587, an Airbus A300 carrying 260 people, began its takeoff roll. It was departing roughly 100 seconds behind a much larger aircraft, a Japan Airlines Boeing 747. Less than 2 minutes into the flight, the A300 hit the wake left behind by that 747. Within seconds, the aerodynamic loads ripped the vertical stabilizer completely off the airplane, and Flight 587 impacted a residential neighborhood in Queens. All 260 people on board and 5 on the ground were killed. Given the timeline, the immediate assumption was straightforward. The brute force of the 747's wake turbulence was so violent that it simply tore the trailing jetliner apart in midair. But when the National Transportation Safety Board concluded their investigation, they revealed a completely different reality. The wake turbulence itself did not destroy the aircraft. At that distance, the 747's wake would have only caused the trailing A300 to roll roughly 5 to 10 degrees. That is a minor bump, sitting well within the aircraft's normal, safe flight envelope. The true cause lay in the cockpit. The first officer had been trained on a flawed simulator program that drastically exaggerated the effects of wake turbulence. Reacting exactly as he was trained, he pushed the rudder pedals into rapid, full alternating inputs. That violent overcorrection is what subjected the tail to forces beyond its structural limits. The invisible force outside the plane didn't doom Flight 587. A profound misunderstanding of how to survive it did. To understand what happened, we have to look at the physics of flight itself. Wake turbulence is not a mechanical malfunction. It is an inescapable consequence of generating lift. Look at this cross-section of a wing in motion. Its specific shape forces air to move differently across its surfaces, creating an area of lower pressure above the wing and higher pressure below. That pressure difference is what lifts the aircraft into the sky. But at the outer edge of the wing, that high-pressure air below naturally seeks out the low-pressure area above. It escapes outward and upward, wrapping violently around the wingtips. The result is a pair of massive, counter-rotating columns of air. The left vortex spins clockwise, the right spins counterclockwise, and they persist in the sky long after the plane has flown away. Anytime an aircraft is heavy enough to achieve flight, it leaves these two invisible horizontal tornadoes trailing in its wake. Not all vortices pose the same threat. Their intensity fluctuates based on a specific combination of aerodynamic variables. The formula for maximum wake intensity requires 3 things: maximum aircraft weight, a minimum airspeed, and extended wing flaps. Those exact 3 conditions are met every single time a large airliner takes off or comes in for a landing. The aircraft is heavily loaded, flying slowly, with flaps deployed to maintain lift. The most violent air you will ever encounter is almost never at cruising altitude. It is hiding just a few hundred feet off the ends of the runway. Because these vortices produce no radar return and are entirely invisible to the naked eye, air traffic controllers cannot actively track them. Instead, they manage the hazard through rigid spacing protocols. The International Civil Aviation Organization classifies every aircraft into one of 4 threat categories based purely on its maximum takeoff weight: super, heavy, medium, and light. These categories dictate mandatory wait times. If a lighter aircraft needs to depart behind a heavy, controllers enforce a 2 to 3 minute hold, giving the massive vortices time to sink toward the ground and dissipate in the wind. Modern aviation is currently upgrading this system through a program called RECAT. By factoring in wingspan and approach speeds alongside raw weight, RECAT safely reduces these wait times, optimizing airport traffic flow without compromising safety. These regulatory minimums act as a mathematical buffer. They guarantee a deadly hazard will expire before the next aircraft arrives to occupy that exact same airspace. But wait times and radar limits only protect you so far. Once a pilot accepts a visual approach clearance to follow the traffic ahead, avoiding the wake becomes their immediate tactical responsibility. In a standard departure, rotate before the heavy aircraft's liftoff point, climbing upwind above its sinking vortex trail. For landing, fly a slightly steeper glide path, maintain airspeed, and touch down well beyond the heavier aircraft's landing point. The highest risk maneuver in these scenarios is the visual approach. A common, highly dangerous error occurs when a pilot turns from their base leg onto final approach, dropping directly below the larger plane's flight path and blindly intersecting the falling vortices. Pilots cannot simply trace the exact path of the giant aircraft in front of them. They have to continuously project its invisible footprint into the sky and intentionally fly outside of it. Returning to Flight 587, the accident reports define the exact physical response required to survive an unexpected encounter with a vortex. The correct procedure is immediate but measured. You apply opposite aileron, using the yoke to level the wings and reduce the bank angle. You must never chase the roll with aggressive rudder inputs. Kicking the rudder back and forth generates oscillating sideways loads that will destroy the airframe. If you simply hold the attitude and don't over-control the aircraft, it will naturally self-stabilize. Survival relies on an accurate understanding of aerodynamic physics, respecting the invisible forces of the wake, and exercising the restraint to let the aircraft recover itself.